Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode on how and why to incorporate wrestling in your jiu-jitsu. Wrestling, in my opinion, is a huge part of your jiu-jitsu curriculum. It should be anyway. If you guys are doing jiu-jitsu and don't do takedowns, hopefully after this video, you're going to be convinced on why you should start. And it's a very crucial, important element. And more importantly, above all, wrestling is fun. Now, a lot of you might be laughing at what I just said, but believe me when I tell you, if you incorporate jiu-jitsu in your program the right way, wrestling is going to be one of your favorite parts, and I think most of you are even going to enjoy it just as much as the jiu-jitsu. It's just as sophisticated, it's just as fun, it's just as technical. And give me a few minutes, sit back, relax, and let me try to convince you why and how to incorporate your wrestling in your jiu-jitsu program. Okay, number one reason why you should incorporate wrestling in your jiu-jitsu: wrestling is very, very powerful for self-defense. If you're doing jiu-jitsu and wrestling, your ability to defend yourself in a street altercation or an MMA fight, whatever, is just multiplied by 100. Multiply whatever ability you have now. If you're doing jiu-jitsu and then you add wrestling to it, your ability to defend yourself or be effective in an MMA fight is just skyrockets. Now, your ability to win just plain old grappling matches, in my opinion, goes up. If you're doing jiu-jitsu, only pure jiu-jitsu, starting on your back every time you roll, and then later on you add wrestling, your jiu-jitsu will get better. Why? For one, you're going to develop a lot more athleticism. It takes a lot more athleticism to wrestle than it does to do jiu-jitsu. Now, I know a lot of you might try to argue that point. Please do me a favor. Before you say anything, just go and take a wrestling class. Try to sit through a good month of wrestling practice, and then tell me your physique didn't change. Tell me that it didn't take a lot more athleticism and a lot more physical capacity. Because of course, when you're doing jiu-jitsu, you and your opponent's body weight is more distributed on the ground, whereas when you're wrestling, you're standing up, you're grinding force to force, you're trying to lift each other off the ground. Okay, it takes a lot more muscular strength and athleticism to do those kind of things. So for those of you who have never wrestled, you might not understand that wrestling is very, very effective in developing physical athleticism, physical attributes. Okay, explosiveness, strength, muscular endurance, etc. It's excellent. So is jiu-jitsu, of course, but wrestling more so. So if you're interested in developing your athleticism, take up wrestling. Now, those are also two very good reasons. One, like I said, you could defend yourself more, and of course, two, develops your strength and athleticism. But my third reason is my favorite reason. Okay, and I think this is the one that I think is most people will get convinced by. Wrestling is fun. Now, why is wrestling fun? Straight wrestling, I don't enjoy as much. If I was going to a freestyle wrestling club, and just wrestling, for me, it's not as I don't enjoy it as much as when we wrestle at Tristar. Now, this is me on screen here wrestling at Tristar, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Whenever we wrestle at Tristar, chokes, submissions are allowed. So when my opponent is shooting in my legs, I'm not going to necessarily just use the sprawl to defend. Of course, I'll sprawl to a certain degree, but I'm looking for darces, I'm looking for guillotines, I'm looking for leg locks, etc. I'm looking for jiu-jitsu counters because they're finishes, and they're fun. I love to do jiu-jitsu counters against traditional wrestling attacks. Okay, so when somebody grabs a single leg on me, or somebody grabs a waist lock, and for those of you who don't understand what I'm saying, these are wrestling terms, traditional wrestling grips that you use to grab your opponent to bring him down. Here's my opponent. Let's see how he's going to try to take me down here. I'm not even sure. I think here I'm going to be trying to do a waist lock, ankle pick, and you see how he pulled guard and he dived right into my legs. Why? Because I did a traditional ankle pick and he turned the counter into a jiu-jitsu maneuver. He didn't do a traditional wrestling counter. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is jiu-jitsu and wrestling clash in such an interesting and amazing way that it opens up a new dimension to your jiu-jitsu. Now, there's my opponent. He was on a single leg, I believe. I don't even remember what he was doing. And I dropped to a leg lock. And this is one of my favorite counters to do. But if I was always starting in guard, I would never have developed these kind of counters. These kind of sitting down to leg locks off a takedown would have never been developed. I would have been, starting in my guard and just trying to scoot towards my opponent. And for me, that's a lot less fun than getting up, standing up, taking my partner down by force, or deflecting one of his takedowns and putting him into a sub. Now, another thing is, a lot of us might be thinking, a lot of us think, I used to think this, that, oh, if a wrestler shot in my legs, I would just dive into a guillotine. I don't need to learn how to defend my legs against a wrestler. It actually takes a lot of practice to time a wrestler's double leg into a guillotine. Now, it does happen all the time, but it takes practice. You know, you can't just learn the guillotine from your guard and think you're going to guillotine somebody who dives into your legs. It's very explosive. The timing is an issue, and it just takes practice like everything else. Here, my partner is probably going to, here, let's see what he does. He tries to do a snap down. He tried to put me in a guillotine. I body lock him, and he flows right into an inverted attack, trying to get me into a leg lock. So there's another great example of how wrestling clashes with jiu-jitsu, and you have all these fun, incredible sequences. Here's me doing a lift. I was trying to do a wrestling maneuver, and he turned it again into a leg lock attempt. And you see, I wasn't able to get on top of him and establish my top position because, again, he used some jiu-jitsu maneuver to get me off him. There's him trying to put me in a guillotine. What did I do? I did something we call a duck under. It's a wrestling maneuver. Take his back and just transition straight into the ground attacks. And transitioning from your feet, you know, from standing up to the ground seamlessly takes a lot of practice. A lot of times I see grapplers who never wrestled before try to transition to MMA. And when they get taken down, on the way down to the ground, they're a second behind. Why? Because they haven't practiced getting taken down over and over again. You see, when me and my partner are taking each other down, we're seamlessly transitioning right into a sub immediately, or right into another attack. You flow right into another attack, and that takes practice. You have to go from the standing position to the takedown, transition, and flow. Here's my partner taking me down. Watch here, I'm trying to hip heist, and here I'm going to flow into a jiu-jitsu attack and not allow him to get his base. Now, going from standing to the ground like this takes a lot of practice, and it's a skill in its own. So for me, when I'm out training, I'm always doing takedowns. Every time I roll, I do takedowns. I don't try to roll on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and do wrestling on Mondays and Fridays or whatever. Some people do those crazy kind of programs. You know, they tell me, oh, I do jiu-jitsu at this club and I wrestle at this club. For me, that's nuts, you know, and I'll tell you why. If you go to any wrestling club, they all do the ground wrestling and the stand-up wrestling with the same coach in the same place, and they work on standing or ground, whatever they feel they need that day. And that's exactly how I train jiu-jitsu at Tristar. You know, at Tristar, wrestling, the wrestling club, the wrestling program, and the jiu-jitsu program are one and the same. There is no difference to the curriculum. And a lot of people come in and say, when's wrestling class? Oh, wrestling is in when we do jiu-jitsu. Some days I teach takedowns, sometimes I teach how to defend takedowns, and sometimes I teach arm bars and chokeholds and sweeps like every other jiu-jitsu club does. But why do we separate wrestling and jiu-jitsu? Mostly because a lot of jiu-jitsu black belts out there that teach jiu-jitsu don't know much about wrestling. So your instructor might not be able to teach you how to do a double leg or an arm drag, etc. But I've been wrestling for as long as I've been doing jiu-jitsu, and I can tell you that, you know, my students are very good wrestlers, very competent wrestlers, and just as much as they are competent grapplers. And for me, the two are one and the same. It's very, very important because, again, that seamless transition from takedown to submission is, for me, probably the most important part of a fight. You know, if we're talking about a real fight, an MMA fight or a self-defense situation, transitioning smoothly from one position to the next is crucial, and it takes a lot of practice. So for me, when I go to a wrestling club, you know, if you go to a freestyle wrestling club, or I know in the US they do a lot of collegiate and folk style and stuff like that, it's a myth to think that wrestlers don't do any groundwork. They do plenty of groundwork, but they also do a lot of stand-up work, right? So wrestlers do takedowns from the standing, and then they learn how to hold somebody down, how to turn somebody over. They do a lot of groundwork as well, and it should be the same in the jiu-jitsu world. The jiu-jitsu world needs to start incorporating takedowns and stand-up just as much as they do anything else. Okay, so for me, that's my recommendation to you guys. Find a way to blend your jiu-jitsu with your wrestling at every single practice. Enjoy the new dimension of jiu-jitsu that you're going to have when somebody shoots in your legs. You're going to be able to attempt guillotines. You're going to be able to attempt kimuras. You're going to figure out new and interesting ways to use your jiu-jitsu against wrestling attacks. It's one of my favorite elements of training. Now, I did put up a video on how to defend, how to counter wrestling with jiu-jitsu, how to fight wrestling with jiu-jitsu. YouTube took it down. There was a right infringement of some sort that I'm not even sure on why, but I'm going to be making more videos. Okay, so my next video that I'm going to put up is how to counter a single leg by dropping into a leg lock. Okay, so it's going to be a fun video for you jiu-jitsu practitioners. It's going to be a good way for you guys to transition to some stand-up training. If you're always pulling guard, if you're always starting on your backside, I'm going to show you a move that you're going to be dying for somebody to grab your leg, you know, standing up. You're going to be really wanting them to grab your leg. Why? Because you're going to want to dive in that leg lock and bring that wrestler down into your world. Okay, so for me, that's how I enjoy my wrestling. I use jiu-jitsu standing up, and for me, it makes it a lot more fun. It gives my jiu-jitsu another dimension. So look out for my next video. My next video will be how to counter a single leg with a leg lock. I also did another video on how to fight wrestling with jiu-jitsu that didn't get taken down. I'm going to connect it to this episode. It should be up on your screen or in the description. Click on it, give it a try, learn how to defend a takedown with a kimura. The next video will be how to defend a takedown with a leg lock. Keep this in mind. Watch these upcoming videos that I'm going to put up on how to counter wrestling with jiu-jitsu, and if you guys like it, I will make more. Thank you for your likes, shares, and comments as usual, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.